Ambassador HFY stood frozen in the council chambers as the impossible news reached every corner of the galaxy. The emergency beacon that had summoned them all was still flashing red above the Great Assembly Hall. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered in less than 6 hours. Something like this had never happened before. "All human communication has stopped," announced Councillor Vexthran, her forearms trembling as she held the data pad. Every single transmission from human space went silent exactly 17 hours and 32 minutes ago. No distress calls, no emergency signals, no final messages, nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. In the 300 years since humans had first stumbled into galactic society, with their crude, faster-than-light ships, they had never stopped talking. Human frequencies were always buzzing with chatter. Trade negotiations, scientific discoveries, cultural exchanges, and their endless stream of entertainment broadcasts that many species had grown surprisingly fond of. Ambassador Quintel from the Altarian Federation was the first to break the silence. Perhaps their communication systems failed. Humans are known for their unreliable technology. There was nervous laughter from a few representatives, but it died quickly. Everyone knew human technology was far from unreliable. If anything, their ability to innovate and adapt had often left other species scrambling to keep up. "We sent 3 scout ships to investigate," Councillor Vexthran continued. "They reported back from the outer edges of human space 2 hours ago. Every human world they found was empty." "Empty?" Admiral Korthwin leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the speaker's podium. "You mean destroyed?" "No, that's what makes this so strange. The cities are intact, power grids are running, automated systems are functioning normally. Ships are still docked at space stations, even their pets are still alive and well, but every single human is gone. All 47 colonies, 12 billion people, vanished without a trace." The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Representatives from dozens of species spoke at once in their native languages. Some were demanding immediate action. Others suggested caution. A few were already calculating how this might affect trade routes and territory claims. HFY found himself thinking about his last conversation with human ambassador Sarah Chen just 2 weeks ago. She had been excited about some new research project her people were working on. Something about expanding their understanding of dimensional physics. At the time, he had only half listened. Humans were always excited about something. "What about the Sol system?" called out Representative Mordoon from the back of the chamber. "Surely Earth still has some answers." Councillor Vexthran's expression grew even more grim. "Our long-range sensors show that Earth is dark. No radio signals. No orbital traffic. No signs of civilization. We're sending a full investigation fleet, but it will take them 6 days to reach Sol system." 6 days. In 6 days they would know for certain what had happened to humanity. But HFY had a terrible feeling that 6 days would be far too late. Already he could see the subtle changes beginning around the chamber. Representatives were huddling with their allies, making quiet deals and agreements. Without humans present to mediate and interfere, old tensions were surfacing. The HFY and Rillan delegations had moved to opposite sides of the hall. Those two species had been at each other's throats for centuries, before humans had somehow convinced them to share mining rights in the disputed Kepler sector. Without human peacekeepers and mediators, how long before old wars resumed? "This changes everything," whispered his aide, Jenkara, leaning close to his ear. "The trade agreements, the territorial disputes, the research partnerships. Humans were involved in almost every major galactic agreement of the last century." HFY nodded grimly. It was true. Humans had a unique gift for finding solutions that nobody else had considered. They thought differently from every other species in the galaxy. Where others saw impossible problems, humans saw interesting puzzles. Where others accepted that certain groups could never work together, humans figured out ways to make unlikely partnerships succeed. "Order! Order in the chamber!" Councillor Vexthran was banging her ceremonial staff on the podium. "We will establish emergency protocols immediately. All ships are banned from entering human space until further notice. We will coordinate search efforts and maintain regular communication updates." But even as she spoke, HFY could see that coordination was already breaking down. The Altarian Federation representatives were leaving early, probably to secure their borders. The Crystalline Collective was sending urgent messages to their home worlds. Everyone was preparing for the chaos that would surely follow. As the session ended and representatives filed out of the chamber, HFY remained in his seat. He stared up at the great dome above them, where the flags of all council member species hung in a circle. The human flag with its blue and green Earth symbol looked so small now, so insignificant, but somehow its absence made the entire chamber feel empty. For 3 centuries, humans had been the chaos factor in galactic politics. The unpredictable element that nobody could quite control or understand. They broke rules, asked uncomfortable questions, and refused to accept that things had to stay the way they had always been. Most species found them exhausting. Now they were gone and the galaxy felt strangely quiet. Too quiet, as HFY finally stood to leave. He had the unsettling feeling that they were all about to discover just how much they had depended on human chaos to keep their carefully ordered galaxy from falling apart. The investigation fleet would reach Sol System in 6 days, but HFY suspected that by then the real crisis would have already begun. Without humans to hold the center together, how long before the galaxy's delicate balance collapsed entirely? In the empty corridors outside the chamber, emergency alarms were already beginning to sound from distant sectors. The first reports of renewed conflicts were starting to arrive. The galaxy was learning what it meant to exist without humanity's steady, chaotic presence, and it was only the beginning. 3 weeks after the humans vanished, Trade Director Kailash stared at the holographic display showing shipping routes across the galaxy. Red warning symbols flashed everywhere. The Kepler Commercial Corridor, once the busiest trade highway in known space, was now marked as a danger zone. 17 more cargo ships lost to pirates this week, reported his assistant. Scrolling through the endless list of incidents, the Meridian Express was attacked just 2 light years from the old human patrol station at Beacon Point. The pirates knew exactly when the convoy would arrive. Kailash closed his eyes and tried to remember how things used to work. Human patrol ships had appeared seemingly random throughout space, but somehow they always showed up exactly where pirates were planning attacks. Nobody understood how they did it. Human ships weren't the fastest or the strongest, but they had an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time. What about hiring private security? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Too expensive. The Altarian security services are charging triple their normal rates. They know we're desperate, and even then they can only cover the major routes. The smaller trading posts are completely cut off. The smaller trading posts. Kailash felt a stab of guilt as he thought about them. Many were colonies that humans had helped establish. Remote outposts that survived on the steady flow of supplies that human merchants had somehow made profitable to deliver. Now those supply lines were broken, and entire communities were facing starvation. His communicator buzzed with an urgent message from the Vegan Medical Research Institute. Dr. Ralthis sounded exhausted. Kailash, we need to talk. The situation here is getting desperate. 20 minutes later, Kailash found himself in the medical center's main laboratory, staring at rows of inactive research equipment. Dr. Ralthis looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her normally pristine lab coat was wrinkled and stained. We've had to shut down 6 major research projects, she explained, gesturing helplessly at the silent machines. All of them required human input. They're biochemists, they're data analysts, they're crazy ideas that somehow always worked. Kailash nodded. He was learning that humans had been involved in far more projects than anyone realized. What kind of research? Everything. Vaccine development for the Rigel plague. New treatments for crystalline decay syndrome. We were so close to a breakthrough on neural regeneration therapy, but the research team was 60% human. Without their insights, we're stuck. She led him to a wall covered with research diagrams and equations. Half of them were written in human notation systems. Look at this. We can understand their calculations, but we can't replicate their thinking process. Humans saw patterns that none of us noticed. They asked questions that led to discoveries we would never have made on our own. As they talked, Kailash received another urgent message. This one from Ambassador HFY at the council chambers. The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had expected. The HFY Confederation just withdrew from the Kepler sector sharing agreement, HFY reported when Kailash arrived at the emergency session. They're claiming the entire sector now that human mediators aren't there to enforce the treaty. Around the chamber, representatives were shouting at each other in multiple languages. The Rillan Empire delegation was furious. They had mining operations throughout the Kepler sector that were now under threat. Without the complex 3-way agreements that humans had somehow negotiated, The two species were back to their ancient territorial disputes. The Rillans are mobilizing their battle fleet, continued HFY. They say they won't let the HFY steal what rightfully belongs to them. Both sides are demanding that the council choose a side. Kailash remembered the last time the council had tried to choose sides in a HFY-Rillan dispute. It was 200 years ago, and the resulting war had lasted for decades. Only human intervention had finally ended it, with a complex solution that gave both sides something they wanted, while preventing either from getting everything they demanded. "What kind of solution are we looking at?" he asked, though he suspected there wasn't one. "That's the problem. We're trying to apply standard diplomatic protocols, but humans never use standard protocols. They would propose something that seemed impossible, then somehow make it work. They had this ability to find common ground where none existed." The session was interrupted by an emergency broadcast from the Tau Ceti system. Director Venkor's image appeared on the main screen, her tentacles writhing with distress. "The orbital manufacturing platforms are failing. We've lost primary life support on 3 stations. We need immediate evacuation assistance." Kailash felt his heart sink. The Tau Ceti manufacturing complex was crucial to the galactic economy. It produced everything from starship components to medical supplies. But the systems were built using human engineering principles that other species still didn't fully understand. "Can't your engineers repair the systems?" asked Counselor Vexthran. Director Venkor's expression was grim. "We've tried. The human maintenance protocols are unlike anything we use. They built redundancies within redundancies, but they also built them in ways that only human technicians seem to understand. Without them, we can't even access the main diagnostic systems." As the day wore on, more reports arrived. Food distribution networks were breaking down, as automated systems designed by humans began failing without proper maintenance. Scientific expeditions were stranded as their human-designed navigation systems stopped working correctly. Even simple trade negotiations were falling apart without human mediators to bridge cultural differences. "How did we become so dependent on them?" Kailash asked HFY as they watched the chaos unfold. "I don't think we realized we were dependent," HFY replied. "Humans were always involved in everything, but they made it look so easy. They would volunteer for impossible tasks and somehow find solutions. We thought they were just being helpful. And now? Now we're discovering that they weren't just helping. They were holding everything together. Without them, we're seeing how fragile our civilization really was." That evening, as Kailash reviewed the damage reports, he received a message that made his blood freeze. The investigation fleet had finally reached Sol system. What they found there would change everything. "Sir?" His assistant's voice was barely a whisper. "The fleet commander is requesting immediate council assembly. Emergency priority. He says what they found at Earth, it's impossible." As alarms echoed through the council building, Kailash wondered if they were about to learn something that would make their current problems seem small. The galaxy was already fracturing without human intervention. But what if humanity's disappearance was just the beginning of something much worse? Fleet Commander Vorthak stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Deep Survey, staring at Earth through the main viewport. The blue and green planet looked peaceful, normal, completely unchanged from the last time he'd visited 5 years ago. But his instruments told a very different story. "Still no response to our hails," reported his communications officer. "No radio traffic at all. The planet is completely silent." Vorthak had seen dead worlds before. War zones, plague planets, natural disasters. But Earth didn't look dead. The lights of cities were still visible on the night side. Weather satellites still orbited normally. Even the International Space Station was still there, its solar panels glinting in the sunlight. "Sir, we're detecting something unusual in the Martian orbital zone," called out the sensor officer. "There's a massive energy signature. It's like nothing in our databases." The main screen shifted to show Mars and its surrounding space. Where the human research station should have been, there was something else entirely. A structure of impossible geometry hung in orbit, crackling with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. "What is that thing?" whispered the navigation officer. "Unknown, but it's emitting quantum signatures I've never seen before. The energy readings are off the scale. Whatever the humans built there, it's operating on principles we don't understand." Vorthak ordered the ship to maintain a safe distance while they investigated. The exploration team that beamed down to Earth an hour later found cities frozen in time. coffee shops with steaming cups still sitting on tables, schools with holographic lessons still playing to empty classrooms, personal vehicles parked in perfect rows, their engines still warm. "Commander, you need to see this," came the voice of Dr. Kelthan from the surface team. "We're in what appears to be a major research facility in Geneva. The humans were working on something called Project Threshold. The data they transmitted back to the ship made no sense. Mathematical equations that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Dimensional calculations that suggested the humans had been working on technology to access parallel universes. Most troubling of all were the energy consumption records. In the final weeks before their disappearance, human power consumption had increased by 3,000%. "Sir, we're getting reports from the other investigation teams," announced the communications officer. "They've found similar installations on every human world. All of them connected to something called the Threshold Network." Vorthak frowned as more data came in. Every human colony had been working on the same project. Massive constructions built in secret, hidden from galactic observers. The scale of the operation was staggering. 12 billion humans had been involved in building something that none of the other galactic species had even suspected existed. "Commander, I'm reading temporal distortions around that structure near Mars," reported the science officer. "Time itself seems to be bent in that area. Our chronometers are giving impossible readings." The investigation continued for 3 days. The more they learned, the more disturbing the picture became. The humans hadn't vanished by accident. They had planned this. Every piece of evidence pointed to a deliberate evacuation of their entire species to somewhere else. But where? Dr. Kelthan's final report was transmitted just as emergency communications began flooding in from across the galaxy. While they had been investigating human space, the rest of galactic civilization had been falling apart. "War has broken out in the Kepler sector," came the urgent message from Council headquarters. "The Zephi and Rillan fleets engaged each other 6 hours ago. Casualties are mounting. We need the investigation fleet to return immediately." But more messages followed. The Altarian Federation had closed its borders and was refusing all trade. The Crystalline Collective was claiming that other species were deliberately targeting their worlds for conquest. 3 smaller species had already declared their independence from the Council, claiming they could no longer trust the larger powers to protect them. How did it get this bad so quickly? Vorthak asked his senior staff as they prepared to depart Sol System. "Without human mediation, old grievances are surfacing," Dr. Kelthan explained. "Humans had a unique ability to find compromise solutions. They could get species to work together even when they fundamentally disagreed about everything. But why would they leave?" demanded the navigation officer. "If they knew how important they were to galactic stability, why abandon us?" Dr. Kelthan pulled up the final piece of data they had recovered from the Geneva facility. It was a partial recording from human ambassador Sarah Chen, made just hours before the disappearance. Her image flickered on the screen, distorted by interference. "The detection arrays have confirmed it. The signals are getting stronger. Something is coming from outside our galaxy, something that makes the Devourers look like children playing with toys. We estimate 12 months before they reach the outer rim." The recording cut off abruptly, but the implications were clear. The humans had detected some kind of external threat, something so dangerous that their only response was to evacuate their entire species. "But why didn't they warn us?" asked the communications officer. "Maybe they tried," Vorthak said grimly. "Or maybe they knew we wouldn't believe them. Humans were always talking about impossible threats and wild theories. How many times did the Council dismiss their warnings as human paranoia?" As the Deep Survey left Sol System, carrying the terrifying news back to the Council, Vorthak couldn't stop thinking about the strange structure orbiting Mars. Whatever the humans had built, it was still active. Still waiting, as if they expected to return, but return from where and when? And most importantly, what was this external threat that had been so terrifying that humanity's only solution was to abandon the galaxy entirely? The journey back to Council space took 4 days. By the time they arrived, the reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of complete chaos. The carefully maintained peace that had lasted for centuries was crumbling. Without humans to hold the center together, every old rivalry and territorial dispute was resurging. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, something was coming. Something that had frightened humanity so much that they had chosen exile over facing it alongside their galactic neighbors. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to face an unknown threat without humanity's chaos and ingenuity to guide them through the darkness. 6 months after humanity's disappearance, Ambassador HFY stood in what remained of the council chambers. Half the seats were empty. The Altarian Federation had withdrawn completely. The Crystalline Collective had declared war on the Outer Rim Alliance. The Great Hall that had once hosted peaceful debates now echoed with the sounds of emergency military briefings. Refugee status confirmed for the Tau Ceti colonies, reported Emergency Coordinator Valessa, her voice tired from months of constant crisis management. The orbital manufacturing platforms finally collapsed last week. 15,000 beings evacuated to temporary shelters on Proxima Base. HFY nodded grimly. The Tau Ceti disaster was just one of dozens. Without human engineers to maintain the complex systems they had designed, critical infrastructure was failing across the galaxy. Hospitals, space stations, terraforming facilities, communication networks. Everything that had been touched by human innovation was slowly breaking down. "What's the current status on the Kepler War?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Expanding. The HFY Third Fleet engaged Rillan forces near the Vega system yesterday. Both sides are claiming victory, but the real casualty count is devastating. At least 40,000 military personnel lost in the last month alone." HFY remembered when the Kepler sector had been a symbol of galactic cooperation. Humans had somehow convinced two ancient enemies to share mining rights in a way that benefited both species. The solution had seemed impossible at the time, but humans had made it work through a combination of creative economics and stubborn diplomacy. Now the sector was a war zone. Both species claimed the humans had secretly favored the other side in the original agreements. Without human mediators to explain the complex reasoning behind the treaties, old suspicions had exploded into open conflict. "The council vote on intervention is tomorrow," Valessa continued, "but I don't think we have the votes. Too many species are afraid of taking sides. They remember what happened the last time the council tried to stop a HFY Rillan war. The last time, 300 years ago, before humans joined the galactic community. The council had chosen sides, and the resulting conflict had dragged on for decades. Entire worlds had been devastated. Billions had died. Only human intervention had finally ended it, with a peace treaty so complex that it had taken 50 years to fully implement. "Sir, urgent message from the Meridian system," announced a communication officer. "Governor Teklan is requesting immediate humanitarian aid. The food distribution network has completely collapsed." HFY closed his eyes. The Meridian system was home to 12 billion beings across 7 worlds. The food distribution network there had been one of humanity's greatest achievements. A complex system of automated cargo ships, orbital farms, and processing stations that kept an entire star system fed. It had been so efficient that no one had bothered to learn how it actually worked. "What kind of time frame are we looking at?" he asked. "Mass starvation within 6 weeks if we can't restore the system. We've sent our best engineers, but they say the human programming is too complex to repair quickly. They estimate it would take 5 years to rebuild from scratch." 5 years. 12 billion beings didn't have 5 years. They barely had 5 weeks. HFY added it to the growing list of humanitarian crises that seemed to have no solution. How had they become so dependent on human systems without realizing it? "There's something else," Valessa said quietly. "The Outer Rim Defense Alliance is fragmenting. 4 species have already withdrawn their ships from joint patrol duties. They're saying they need to protect their own borders first." The Outer Rim Defense Alliance, another human innovation. They had convinced dozens of smaller species to pool their limited military resources for mutual protection against pirates and raiders. It had been incredibly effective, turning weak individual fleets into a formidable combined force. But the alliance had required constant human mediation. Humans had a talent for convincing species to trust each other, even when they had nothing in common. They found ways to share resources fairly, resolve disputes quickly, and maintain morale during difficult times. Without that constant mediation, the alliance was falling apart. Species that had worked together for decades were now suspicious of each other's motives. Old territorial disputes were resurging. The combined fleet that had once protected thousands of worlds was breaking into dozens of smaller, weaker forces. The science academies are requesting permission to establish independent research protocols. Valessa continued reading from her list. They say they can't wait for council approval on every project now that the human review boards are gone. HFY felt a chill. The Human Research Review Boards had been established after the Proxima incident 50 years ago. They had prevented dozens of potentially dangerous experiments from being conducted, not because humans were more cautious than other species, but because they asked different questions. They thought about consequences that other species missed. "What kind of research are we talking about?" he asked. "Genetic modification experiments on Vega Prime, dimensional phase research in the Centauri labs, artificial intelligence development on 3 different worlds, all projects that humans had flagged as potentially dangerous. Each of those research areas had the potential to cause galactic-level disasters if something went wrong. Humans had insisted on oversight not because they wanted to control other species, but because they had a gift for imagining worst-case scenarios. They thought about what could go wrong in ways that other species simply didn't. "I'm recommending against approval," HFY said. "We can't afford any more disasters right now. The academies are threatening to withdraw from the council if we don't approve their requests. They say they won't let bureaucracy hold back scientific progress. Another crisis, another impossible choice. Approve dangerous research and risk galactic catastrophe, or refuse and lose more members from an already fractured council." Humans would have found a third option somehow. They always did. "Sir, priority message from Fleet Command," interrupted the communication officer. "Long-range sensors are detecting unusual activity in the void zone. Ships of unknown design moving toward galactic space." HFY felt his blood freeze. The void zone. The empty space between galaxies where nothing was supposed to exist. Where humanity had detected signals that had terrified them enough to abandon everything they had built. "How long until they reach the outer rim?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Current trajectory suggests 6 months. Maybe less, 6 months. In 6 months, whatever had frightened humanity would arrive at a galaxy that was already tearing itself apart. A galaxy without the species that had held it together for 3 centuries. A galaxy that had forgotten how to cooperate, how to trust, how to find solutions to impossible problems." As emergency alarms began sounding throughout the council building, HFY realized they were about to face the ultimate test. The galaxy would either learn to work together without human guidance, or it would fall apart completely just as the greatest threat in galactic history arrived at their doorstep. And somewhere in the dark between dimensions, humanity watched and waited, hoping they had given their former neighbors enough time to prepare for what was coming. The first sign of their return was the strange humming that filled the void near Mars. Fleet Commander, Forthak was conducting a routine patrol of Sol system when the quantum sensors detected energy patterns that defied explanation. The mysterious structure that humans had left orbiting Mars began to pulse with brilliant light. "Sir, we're reading massive dimensional distortions," reported his science officer. "It's like reality itself is bending around that structure. The readings are off every scale we have." Then the sky tore open. A rift in space itself appeared near the human structure, crackling with energies that existed in dimensions the galactic species couldn't even perceive. And through that impossible opening they came. The first ship that emerged was recognizably human in design, but changed, enhanced. It moved with a grace that seemed to ignore the normal laws of physics, sliding between dimensions as easily as flying through empty space. More ships followed, hundreds of them, all bearing human signatures, but using technology that was centuries ahead of anything they had possessed when they vanished. "This is Fleet Commander Vorthak to approaching vessels," he transmitted on all frequencies. "Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came immediately, but not from where he expected. Ambassador Sarah Chen materialized on his bridge, not as a hologram but as a solid presence that had somehow appeared from nowhere. "Hello, Vorthak," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions he couldn't name. "We need to talk, all of us. Emergency council session in 6 hours." She looked the same as she had a year ago, but there was something different about her. Her eyes held depth that seemed to contain galaxies. When she moved, reality seemed to adjust itself around her, as if the normal laws of physics were merely suggestions in her presence. "Where have you been?" Vorthak managed to ask. "Learning," she replied simply. "We detected an extragalactic threat that we weren't equipped to handle. So we went somewhere we could become equipped. What we thought would be a few months in your time became subjective centuries for us. We've been advancing, preparing, evolving. And now you're back." Sarah's expression grew grim. "We're back because they're almost here. The Devourers. reality eaters from between galaxies. We have perhaps days before they reach the outer rim, and from what we can see, the galaxy is in no condition to resist them. As if summoned by her words, emergency communications flooded in from across known space. The Kepler War had reached a devastating climax. 3 entire star systems were now uninhabitable war zones. The Council had effectively collapsed, with only 12 species still attending sessions. Critical infrastructure was failing everywhere as human-designed systems broke down without maintenance. "My God," Sarah whispered as she accessed the reports through some means Vorthak couldn't understand. "We expected some disruption, but the galaxy is destroying itself." "You left us," Vorthak said, and he couldn't keep the accusation out of his voice. "You vanished without warning, without explanation. Did you expect us to just carry on as if nothing had happened?" Sarah's face showed genuine pain. "We thought we'd be gone for weeks at most. Time flows differently in higher dimensions. What felt like centuries to us should have been a brief absence in your timeline. We never intended to abandon you, but you did abandon us, and now you're back just in time to watch everything fall apart." "No," Sarah said, and her voice carried a certainty that seemed to reshape reality around them. "We're back to fix this, all of it. But we're going to need help. The galaxy has to choose, work together or face extinction separately." The emergency council session 6 hours later was unlike anything in galactic history. Representatives from species that had been at war just days earlier found themselves sitting in the same chamber, staring at human delegates who radiated power that bent space around them. Ambassador Zexhai was among the first to speak. "Where were you when we needed you? When our worlds were starving? When wars erupted because we couldn't mediate our own disputes?" Sarah stood to address the assembly, and when she did, every screen in the chamber displayed images that made the blood of every being present run cold. Vast ships the size of moons, moving through the void between galaxies. Behind them, empty space where entire star systems had once existed. "We were preparing for this," she said simply. "The Devourers consume reality itself. They don't just destroy planets or species. They erase them from existence entirely as if they never were. Our conventional weapons, our normal technology, even our traditional ways of thinking would have been useless against them." "So you left us to die?" demanded Admiral Korthwin from the Rillan delegation. "We left to find a way to save everyone," Sarah replied, "including you. But we returned to find a galaxy that has forgotten how to work together, how to trust each other, how to find solutions to impossible problems." She gestured, and the displays showed the current state of galactic civilization: wars, failed infrastructure, collapsed alliances, species retreating into isolation. "This is what the Devourers feed on," she continued. "Division, chaos, the breakdown of cooperation. A united galaxy could resist them. A fractured one will be consumed piece by piece." "And what do you propose?" asked Counselor Vexthran. "That we simply forgive and forget? That we trust you again after you abandoned us?" Sarah looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives, some angry, some afraid, all desperate for solutions that seemed impossible to find. "We propose that you choose," she said finally. "We can force unity. With our new capabilities, we could end all the wars, repair all the infrastructure, solve all the immediate crises. We could impose peace and cooperation through superior technology and overwhelming power." The chamber fell silent. Everyone could sense the truth in her words. The humans had returned with power beyond comprehension. They could indeed force the galaxy back into order. "Or," Sarah continued, "you can choose to work together, not because we force you to, but because you decide that survival is more important than old grievances, because you choose cooperation over destruction." "And if we choose wrongly?" asked Zexhai. Sarah's expression was grave. "Then we'll do what we must to protect what can be protected. But a galaxy that can't choose cooperation when facing extinction might not be worth saving." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Species that had been at war accused each other of treachery. Others demanded guarantees that humans would never abandon them again. Some questioned whether humanity's new power had made them too dangerous to trust. But gradually, as the scope of the external threat became clear, old enemies began talking to each other instead of about each other. Zexhai and Rillan delegates found themselves working together to analyze defensive strategies. Species that had withdrawn from all cooperation began proposing joint research projects. It wasn't trust. Not yet. It was necessity, but it was a beginning. As the session concluded with agreements for emergency cooperation, Sarah approached Zexai privately. "We never meant to abandon you," she said quietly. "We thought we were protecting you." "And now?" he asked. "Now we know better. The galaxy doesn't need us to solve its problems. It needs us to help it remember how to solve problems together. We're not here to be your saviors. We're here to be your partners." Outside the council chambers, human ships began working alongside galactic fleets to repair critical infrastructure, not by imposing human solutions, but by helping other species find solutions that worked for them. The chaos that had seemed unstoppable just days before began slowly giving way to cautious cooperation. And in the dark between galaxies, the Devourers continued their approach, unaware that the fractured galaxy they had expected to find was beginning to remember how to stand together against the impossible. Humanity had returned, changed, evolved, but still the same chaotic force that refused to accept that problems were unsolvable. And once again, the galaxy would discover what it meant to have humans as allies in the face of extinction. The real test was just beginning.